Scripture reading this morning is taken from Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through chapter 2 and verse 4. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live." Good news, bad news. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very strong, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews ye shall cast into the Nile, but ye shall let every daughter live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket and made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done with him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother.
Thank you, Lee. Well, good morning, everyone. I am glad you made it here, and I'm glad you've been able to be a part of our worship service. Before I get into the sermon, I did want to remind you, one of the acts of service that this church does during the summer is New Heights Summer Camp. And New Heights is one of our summer outreach to our local community, and over 200 kids will be here every day for about 50 days. They'll be at this church building. They will attend a daily camp from June 12th all the way to August 4th, Monday through Friday. It begins at like around 8:45, and the camp is over at 4:30. So there's going to be lots of kids, so that implies, and you can know that means we need lots of volunteers. New Heights is successful because of those that volunteer to be a part of it. We have between 3,000 to 4,000 hours of volunteer time that are needed. If you would like to be a part of it, we have a schedule put out in the foyer. You can see the bulletin board and sign up to help volunteer. There are a number of ways you can volunteer. You can help out in the kitchen. The kitchen volunteers help by preparing and serving breakfast and lunch. That's basically from 7:30 to 1:30. You can be a camp counselor assistant, which is you'd be here from 8:30 to 4:30. You're kind of like a city leader if you're familiar with our Vacation Bible School. You'll help one of our full-time counselors just take the kids from place to place to place, make sure they're at the proper place at the proper time. You could also be a dishwasher. We call that kitchen security. Okay? Dishwashers will basically work from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Or you could actually be what we're calling a leaders in training, which is like the camp counselor assistant. You'd be doing the same thing. But if you're willing to put down and say that I will be here 20 of the plus days, if you do that on your completion of the 20 days, then you will be given a stipend of $250, which is just an appreciation for what you're doing. So there's many ways to help out our summer outreach program called New Heights. So if you're interested in that, please see that in the foyer. Now, for many in our congregation, Mother's Day is a beautiful time to remember and celebrate the women who have given birth, nurtured their children, and left a profound legacy of Christ-likeness. And yet, this day is not that simple. It's a day of joy, but for some, it's also a day of pain. It's a day of celebration, but for some, it's also a day of longing and grief. Some women and their husbands are still yearning for that first child. Some are facing infertility. Some have faced miscarriages. Others have been through divorce, misunderstandings, bad choices, so that relationships are being grieved today. So ladies, may our prayers and concerns be with all of you this day. Okay, may you feel supported and may you feel loved. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord turn His face toward you and shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may He give you peace. But what I do know is, with so many emotions and feelings weighing in the balance, what I want you to know is it is our desire to love and support moms. Okay? Many times, in our desire to do that, we turn over to the book of Proverbs and we go to that chapter in Proverbs, which I call it the birthplace of Superwoman. I should say Wonder Woman, right? And you know what I'm talking about. And we read this chapter in the Bible, in Scripture, this almost superhuman feats of this woman, right? We've read that before. And many of us read that and we go, man, who can even compare with that? And many of our moms read that passage and struggle with feelings of inadequacy and uncertainties. And they have mixed feelings of joy and also feelings of guilt, maybe even anger. So what I want to make sure we understand is today's not about guilting you, Mom. That's not what today's about. It's not about pointing out where you may have failed. It's about thanking you for the blessing that you are. And it's about encouraging you in the strength that you have. Being a mother, it's not for the faint of heart. Okay, it requires some tough decisions. Decisions that are risky and heart-wrenching. Decisions that require faith. So I would like us to reflect on the story of a woman who's mentioned only a few times in Scripture. Yet despite her low profile in Scripture, she provides a finely drawn portrait of a mother with faith. In fact, she even made it into the Hall of Fame. Okay, what I mean by that is Hebrews chapter 11. Okay, she made it into Hebrews chapter 11. Her name, according to Numbers 26:59, was Jochebed. She was Moses' mom. The nation of Israel had been in Egypt for almost 400 years. They grew and they prospered there. And before long, they became a threat to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh forced them into slavery. He hoped to break their backs, but they continued to grow and prosper. So he turned up the heat a little bit more, and he commanded the Hebrew midwives to murder the newborn sons. He commanded his people then to stay on the lookout, since that didn't work very well. He commanded his own Egyptian people, stay on the lookout, and if you saw a baby boy, throw him into the Nile. And it was into this reign of terror that Jochebed became pregnant. She became pregnant with her third child, and she didn't really have to worry about the older kids, Aaron and Miriam, but the child in her womb was fair game. Can you imagine living with that kind of fear? Can you imagine what that was like? When I think of the times in which Jochebed was called to be a mom, I think of some mothers today, maybe in parts of Africa, moms that faced the real prospect of having their sons taken from their arms to be trained as children's soldiers. These are challenges. These are challenging days that it is to be a mom in this world. And while maybe nobody threatens to take our kids in America, there are forces that are threatening to take our kids. There are forces at work in the river of violence and sexual immorality that are pouring out through the internet and movies and TV every day. There is a sea of confusion in the lines between what's right and what's wrong. There is a competitive culture in this country where it rewards performance above character. So every conscientious parent knows how dangerous it is to grow up in our world today. And in the dangers of the world in which she found herself, Jochebed, she stands out because she did what she could to save her child. And then, when she had done what she could do, she depended totally on the faithfulness of God. She was a model of faith. This is a portrait of a faithful mom. You ready? She did what she could, and she depended on a faithful God. In this portrait, I want you to see that Jochebed had a courageous faith. I want you to see that she had a courageous faith. Listen to what the Hebrew writer says about Amram and Jochebed. Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And though the king said all the male Hebrew babies had to be thrown into the Nile, Jochebed and her husband disobeyed the king and hid Moses for 3 months. I just want you to imagine how difficult that would be. Moms and dads, think back to when your child was an infant. There was no hum of the air conditioner. There was no TV or jam box or something to turn up the sound. We often think of faith as passive, this whole idea of just let go and let God. But I want to tell you, faith is real, and it is interactive, and it is active. Faith sometimes calls us to do risky things. And I think of mothers who have been unable to conceive, and yet through their understanding have seen an opportunity to adopt children. And these children otherwise might have spent their entire lives in orphanages or going from home to home. I think of mothers who are married to unbelieving husbands but who make sure, despite opposition at home, that their children are brought to class. They're brought to worship so they can find and come to an understanding of who God is. I think of mothers who help their teenage children say no to immodesty, say no to sexual immorality, to worldly standards. And they say yes to those things which other Christian moms and dads and the Scripture holds important, and they bring their kids around those places. And I think of mothers who choose to give up or downsize a career to spend time with their children. But I know that there are different places, and I know there are different circumstances for all of us. What gives moms courage to act the way they do? What gives mom the strength to go against the societal norms? What gives mom the strength and the courage to say yes or no to a certain thing with their kids? And I believe the answer is they fear God more than they fear man. They love God more than they love man. They care more about what God thinks than they care about what other people think. They want to please God more than they want to please their friends. They want to please God more than they want to please their children or even their husbands. They trust God first. They trust that as they're obedient to what He's calling them to do in the face of threatening circumstances, that He will take care of them and that He will take care of their child. So Jochebed had a courageous faith. She did what she could do, and then she trusted God with the rest. And in that faith, she had a sensible faith. It made sense. After 3 months of hiding her baby, she saw the handwriting on the wall, so to speak. She made a little wicker basket. She covered it with tar and pitch to make it float, and she put it in the reeds of the bank of the Nile. And it's interesting, I don't know if you knew this or not, but that basket that she put this child in, the word basket is the exact same word for ark that Noah built. Now, pause right there and just go, wow, it's a pretty cool little basket then, wasn't it? How big was that? Yeah, I don't know how big it was, but what I want you to know, it was a place of safety. It was a place where he was being saved. Can I put it that way? And at 3 months old, Moses was completely helpless, but he was in the river. And the river, we already know, was filled with crocodiles. Did y'all ever think of that? But what I want you to notice is that Jochebed was not careless about this. She was sensible about it. She didn't send him floating down the river. She made a place for him among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. This was a place where her daughter could watch over him. This was a place that was a gathering place for, let's just say, the princess of Egypt. This was among the bulrushes. This was among a place that women would even come to wash and to bathe. And this was a safe place. It was, in a way, like placing a baby on the steps of a hospital. She didn't just put him in the Nile, wave goodbye, and say, have a nice life. She had his older sister stand at a distance to find out what would happen to him. And if Jochebed herself stood by the reeds waiting and watching, it probably would have been obvious. But Moses' sister made a good, you ready for this one? Moses' sister made a good kemosabe. Okay, maybe what you didn't know is that kemosabe is the Ojibwe or the Potawatomi Indian language way to say he looks out in secret. That's not Greek, that's Indian. Okay. When Moses was discovered in the Nile, his sister offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse him, and the plan fell into place. You see, Jochebed was clever. She was sensible in her planning. Jochebed had a courageous faith, a sensible faith, and she also had a faith that was rewarded. As Moses floated along the banks of the Nile, the daughter of Pharaoh arrived with her maidens. And the text says that she saw the basket and had it brought to her. She opened it and she saw the crying child. And she had pity on him because he was a Hebrew child and could just as well be dead. Now, I want to thank this woman, okay? I want to thank this woman because she too, in essence, went against the king's edict. Okay, I want to thank this woman's degree of compassion. Because she took him into her home. And not only that, she provided for this child. It was standard procedure for a wealthy woman to hire a nurse to feed a child and take care of a child until he was weaned. And this nurse would be like a legal guardian during those first few years. And it happened just at the right time, at the right place, just the way it needed. Moses' sister moved in, made an offer to help fulfill that custom. And then she went to find Mom. And so Mom got to be the legal guardian of a child that most likely would have been dead. And surely you can see God's hand in this. This mother did what she could, but she couldn't have done all this on her own. She depended on the faithfulness of God. And yet, this day, today, this day is just not that simple. It's a day of joy, but for some it's also a day of pain. It's a day of celebration, celebrating the place of mothers, but it's also a day of longing, and for some a day of grief. And Mom, this is not about guilt. It's about thanking you for the blessing you are. It's about encouraging you in the strength that you have, and it's about encouraging you to trust God. I want to end with an illustration. And I am 99% sure that most of everybody in here may have heard this. I'm going to say it anyway because it's a really good illustration. There was a water bearer in India who had two large pots, both hung at the end of a long pole that he carried across his back, across his neck. You can see the picture. He's carrying the pole, and each of the pots were on the ends. Well, one of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect. One pot had a crack in it, but one pot delivered a full jar of water. At the end of the long walk from the stream back to the house, the cracked pot always arrived about half full. The poor cracked pot was ashamed of its imperfection, and miserable that it was only able to accomplish half of what it had been made to accomplish. So after a couple of years of what the cracked pot perceived to be bitter failure, it finally spoke to the water bearer one day at the stream. I'm ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize. I've been able only to deliver half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to the house. Because of my flaws, you have had to do more work, and you don't get the full value of your efforts. And the water bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw. And I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walked back, you watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate the table without you being just the way you are. there would not be this beauty to grace this house. Thankfully, God uses cracked pots. You do not need to be perfect, just courageous and sensible, and trust God. He knows exactly where you are, and God will reward your faithfulness. Whew. We want to have a prayer for our moms and for all of our ladies. We want to have a prayer specifically for you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sing an invitation song. And I'm asking any moms that would like to come up here and have our elder, Gary Lynn, will say this prayer, pray over you and pray for all of us. Please feel free to come down and be a part of that. Come up here. You can be the person from your family that comes. You can stay right in your seat. I get that too. Okay? But we want to make sure all of our ladies, our moms and all of our ladies know that this church loves you, supports you, and encourages you to be the person in God that God knows you can be. Let's stand and let's sing.